and welcome everyone to Coproduce Care's hashtag Chat for Care and Care Uncut. So we are doing another live stream today, and I'm really excited about the theme that we have. As you can see, I have another guest, unexpected guest, totally unplanned. Unfortunately, I have no childcare for this evening, so she is joining us. So forgive me if I have to go on mute now and again. But yes, so today we're going to be looking at gender equality in health and social care. So there's been a fantastic report done by the World Health Organization. It's entitled Delivered by Women, Led by Men, and it is a gender inequality analysis of the global health and care workforce by the World Health Organization, Global Health Workforce Network, and Women in Global Health. And so the aim of the report is to research and really to find some kind of ideas that can help with informing policy and action around this area. And some of the things that really took me aback was some of the findings. So you had issues on occupational segregation, you had leadership issues, decent work, and also, of course, the gender pay gap. So I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Michelle McIsaac today from the World Health Organization. And we'll be talking through really finding out a little bit more about the recommendations and about the report. And what I really want to do is get quite a bit of interaction. So if you don't mind, obviously I'm going to need you to do a bit of the questions for me. So do make sure that you put some questions in the chat. And we're doing something a little bit unusual today. So we're actually also on Twitter Spaces. And we've done this before, but we've not done Twitter Spaces and YouTube at the same time. So if you're on Twitter, you'll see that we're also broadcasting this there. So people on Twitter Spaces will be able to hear what's going on, obviously not see us. So we may get some interaction and questions from there, which you'll be able to hear on my phone shortly. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Michelle. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening.
Good evening to you. And there was a bit of time difference today, but just I think about an hour. Where are you at the moment?
I'm coming to you from Geneva, Switzerland.
Lovely. So that explains that one. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go on mute for a bit and allow you just to introduce yourself and the report, if you don't mind.
Sure, my pleasure. So I'm Michelle McIsaac. I'm an economist at the World Health Organization. In my field of economics, I've specialized really in the areas of health and labor and development economics, and I really do focus on the global health and care workforce. I oversee WHO's program of work on gender equality in the global health and care workforce. And I also co-chair the Global Health Workforce Network's Gender Equity Hub, which is the network that is behind the report that we're here to talk about today.
Lovely, thank you. And what I'm really interested in is actually, we've got the one report that I've mentioned, but there's also a follow-up report that kind of introduces some recommendations and goes into depth a bit more about some of the issues. But I wouldn't mind, I think my colleague Tobias might put up some overlays, we call them, just going through some of the issues that the report highlighted.
Yeah, so this is an overlay here that's talking about occupational segregation by gender. So there's two kinds of occupational segregation by gender that we see in the health and social care workforce. One of them is horizontal and one of them is vertical. So here we're really focusing on the horizontal occupational segregation by gender. So this is the idea that there are certain kinds of jobs that women are taking and certain kinds of jobs that men are taking, or that there's some social norms that are identifying the types of choices or the career choices that women or men are taking. So this is kind of your standard, women are nurses and midwives and men are surgeons. And we see this really pervasively and really very clearly in the different kinds of occupations in the health and care sector, which are predominantly women. So overall, women really predominate. It's a very feminized sector, but there are particular roles that are mostly women, and there are particular other roles that are mostly men.
And I suppose we all really kind of know the issues, but what's the effect? The report kind of talks about the effect of this and the lack of leadership representation. There is a leadership level, and I think that was really interesting to read some of that, and the fact that actually you've got people who are delivering a lot of the care, but who aren't able to be involved in the decision-making side of it. So I'd be interested to hear sort of a bit more around about the issues of that, because I feel like it's an age-old issue and problem that people are well versed with in lots of different sectors, but there's specific issues in the health and care sector that isn't identified in the report.
Yeah, so what we know in health and care is that it is very feminized. There are lots of women who are participant in here, but then there is a gap. There's a gap in terms of leadership. So there aren't women in these leadership roles. So we estimate in the new report that it's probably around 25% of global leadership roles are held by women, whereas women are very predominant in the sector. And so what does this do? I mean, there are obviously really important effects when we see sectors that are delivered, where the majority are women, and those women don't have a seat at the table. Some of the effects are that we're losing out on their knowledge, right? So women, they tend to have very, very deep understandings of health systems. They know very well the forefront issues. They're embedded in communities in a particular kind of way. And when we don't invite them to make decisions, we lose out on those perspectives. So that's very key and very important to be thinking about. Another issue is that it might be an unattractive sector for women. So if women are in and they're doing all of this and they have all of this knowledge and it's not being used, or they're not making it up the career ladder, they might leave the sector. And that's a really important issue right now with COVID-19. That's an important issue with the global shortage that we're facing with health workers. But really, there are lots of impacts on health systems, impacts on acceptability of care. So this is an important intersectoral issue, an important issue that we see coming through in terms of the different kinds of health workers that they are. If you're not seeing yourself in the service providers, then maybe you don't find those service providers to be as acceptable as if you saw yourself in them. And this matters for gender, this matters for age, this matters for ethnicity and race and all sorts of issues that we really want to have carers that are representative of the communities that they're serving.
Brilliant. Can we bring up another one of the points as a graphic? I don't mind. So for this one, large percentage of women in health workforce face bias and discrimination. And of course, the big point for me, and I'd love to hear more about this, is the fact that male health workers are more likely to be organised in trade unions than female. And often I hear people say that, well, the health sector or the health and care sector generally just isn't very unionised, but to actually understand and unpick those figures to show that actually a section of the workforce is more unionised than another side. Can you explain that a bit more? Are there occupational differences in that? Is that why that's coming up, or is it just quite simply a gender split? I don't know if the data.
Yeah, it's based a lot on that occupational segregation. So it's the kinds of roles that women are holding and men are holding. And there's this really interesting paradox in the health sector where we see that there's a hierarchy essentially in health, and what we see is that at the bottom of the echelon, we might see women are more likely to be in the private sector. So they're more likely to hold private sector roles. They're more likely to hold part-time roles all through, but particularly down at the lower status. And at the top end of the scale, what you actually see is men are more likely to be in the private sector. So where there is more job security, maybe where there is more potential for income earnings, we actually see the flip. So it comes down to the occupations that the choices and occupations and where they are in there, but it also comes down to the labor market attachment, or what we call the labor market attachment, which is that all throughout, women are more likely to be working fewer hours. They're less likely to be in the full-time roles. It's often these full-time roles that are unionized, even within the same occupation. And then they're also holding many of those jobs at the lower status areas with a lot less job security.
Great. And in terms of gender policies, I think we've got an overlay about gender policies that we can pop up. So this is some of the recommendations, moving on to those now. So they've got to be adopted that challenge the underlying causes of gender inequalities. And that's talking more around contributing sort of like a mismatch of supply and demand and wasted talent. And the reason I kind of wanted to explore this a little bit more is that there's a lot, especially in this country, there's starting to be a lot of money and laws actually being changed and adapted to think about professionalizing the care workforce particularly. And I was just wondering whether policies, what are the policies that we should be looking at to support that better gender equality in the sector as we're going through this transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about that particular slide, or what we're really thinking about when we're developing these kinds of lines of thoughts, is that I think a lot of the change that's been suggested is change which is sort of to train women into leadership roles, or ones that are looking to sort of to address women in the system. But what we're really trying to push towards is that the system has an issue. There's issues within the system, and it's not changing women to fit the system, but it's actually addressing the issues within the system that pre-exist, and that were developed, maybe with a different vision in mind, and really challenging that to ensure that the system is actually one that's representative and that takes the needs of the majority of their workforce into place. And I think the other thing that's really interesting in this is that what we know is that women are delivering a lot of this health and care work. We know that these women are behind the health of our societies, our economies. But what we haven't really dug down to, and I think what's really important in there, is how important the health sector is for women. So it is one of the highest feminized sectors. Women participate in a higher rate in health than they do in the general labor market. So it's really important for women as well. And I think really getting into addressing and making sure that this sector has high quality jobs for women, jobs that really address the needs that women have, can be really transformative for labor markets for women in general. And how can health and care play a leadership role in that, as I think really what we're trying to push policymakers towards.
And you talked a bit about systems. Are there anything in particular in terms of, I feel like sometimes when people are thinking of reorganizing things in their organization or changing sort of institutional policies, there are some quick wins. Is there anything that you would or the report suggests that could be done in terms of changing those systems? Is it as simple as providing childcare, for example, or better facilities, or what kind of policies would, I don't want to put things in your mouth, so what kind of policies would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of layers that need to be addressed, right? And I think it depends, on the context and what are the major barriers. So what we were trying to do in the Delivered by Women, Led by Men report is to really sort of bring forth what are the major barriers that we see to more gender equal health and care workforce. And then how do we address those particular barriers that we're facing? So for example, in terms of, there are lots of very pragmatic policy options, and this is what the second report is driving to on leadership, and we'll have another one coming out hopefully at the early next year on occupational segregation. It's really good. It's a very pragmatic policy option. So I think there's a lot of often reaction, oh, this is such a big issue, what can we possibly do here? Would something like this work? But yes, but we need probably to bundle our interventions. We need to have them, not just addressing one particular area, but really addressing the different layers that are involved. So, for example, one of the statistics that is in the Delivered by Women, Led by Men report that we tease out in the later report is one around, the laws. Right. So there are lots of laws that we have in certain countries around women's right to work, when women can work, if women can work in the evenings or not. And so, addressing the legal foundation for work is very important. So if there are laws in a particular context that are, that are in place, addressing those and thinking around those is really important. I think in terms of collective bargaining, which you were speaking to before, this is a really important element to ensure that women have access to these kinds of mechanisms so that their needs can come to the fore and they can bargain for these kinds of needs that they might have. Pay transparency is another policy that's been shown to be really important in terms of negotiating pay. If your pay is negotiated, knowing what others are making, this is really key. Gender and family-friendly policies are really important as well. So those that are around parental leave, carers leave, I think is one of the very interesting things for the health and care sector is, we are often, as those in the sector are often looked at from family members as those who would take up an unpaid care role if one arose in their particular family because of what they're doing in the labor market. And I think to ensure that we're providing carers leave, that we're providing paternity leave, parental leave, to those that are in here, to make sure that we don't lose individuals out of the labor market permanently when they are taking up these roles that they're very well suited to be doing, right? The other ones that we talk about are laws against violence and harassment in the workplace. Those are sort of foundational laws. I mean, this year we have the ILO Convention 190, which addresses this issue. So has your country adopted this? How would that impact the health and care workers? We are one of the sectors who are facing high levels of this, so addressing that. I could go on all night. There's so many things that can be done here. And it's really just a matter of finding out what are the key barriers and then enacting some of these policies. They're pragmatic, they're feasible, and they're doable.
Yeah, that's a really, really helpful summary. And I'm going to just share my screen if I can do it without being too complicated about it. So hopefully you can see that. One of the things that is addressed is social norms and stereotypes and the effect that they actually have in forming our views and how then it filters through to the way that we are supporting a majority female workforce within the health and care sector. So there's quite a bit of that. It's talking about, it happens more or less in the education of people at school, but I think there might also be general issues with our social norms and stereotypes in society that means that there's just a little bit more difficulty in trying to advocate for better standards for women in this way. And I wondered whether there are any other things apart from education that would help in trying to just build more of a social conscience around the issues, particularly how they affect women, and how you've explained actually that knock-on effect for women at work is also for women's health.
Yeah, I think is what's really interesting. The social context is a complicated one, and it's one that varies, right? It varies by country, it varies by community, it varies by the person within the community and the role that they hold within the community and the expectations. It's a complicated area, but I think what's really interesting, around this is that we can do some things around education, around what we're studying, what's interesting in the STEM, introducing STEM and ensuring, accessibility to this, ensuring who's getting education in particular areas. But the other one that I think is really important and that hasn't been discussed as much is that there's a career progression that can happen. So if we have, competency-based education, if we have particular pathways where career progression can happen, then even if your natural, pathway in, because it was what was available to you or what you were told you would be good at, or other in is one particular health or care occupation, that there can be a career pathway that might veer from that and be different. So you could see community health workers who may have entered into the health space, via particular having more training or more opportunities to shift and grow within this. And I think that would be one that would really address, as social norms are changing over time, as we're pathing through this in a different way to change the outcomes eventually, that, more and different can happen throughout. So you might enter as a community health worker, but have the option to go in and be a laboratory or, something else as you see what else is available to you.
Thank you. We have a question. I think we can have it put up for us so we can see it. So that's talking a little bit about the information used. If you could answer that.
Yeah. So I think it actually ends up being one of the recommendations in the report. So a lot of this is peer-reviewed literature. A lot of this is literature that's out there. But what the report did really find is that a lot of the evidence in literature is from high-income countries on this, and that a lot of it is looking at one piece of the issue, but not particularly from a more intersectional angle. And so I think that one of the recommendations that comes out of the report is really the need to understand this in all of the different contexts and to delve into this in different ways. And I think the question talks a little bit about kind of the gray literature or literature that's out there. And I think that this is really important as we're looking to policy solutions and some of the work that we're doing right now, trying to assess what are pragmatic policy options, is to really make sure that we're getting access to evidence and information that's not coming out in the kind of normal peer-reviewed literature. And that's a challenge, but I think a lot of really rich information is in that space.
Great, thank you. And one of the things that I am just trying to find it on the document, but there was a really interesting graph that showed the countries that were doing quite well. And I think, trying to think which area it was, but for some reason, I think Latvia was doing really well, I think it was in representation, in terms of representation. So I don't know whether that's too much detail to look at now, but are there any things that, what is the cause or the reasons behind some of those variations in countries, in how well they're doing in terms of whether it's the results for women or in terms of representation?
Yeah, I think foremost it's important to say that no country has achieved gender equality, right? So I don't think that there is, there's not a single place that we can look to say, okay, that there's no issues there. This has all been resolved, and this is the path forward. So I think everyone is facing, their issues in different ways, and I think that there is a lot of different pieces that are playing into this, like how privatized is the sector, is the health sector, health and care sector, how publicly funded is it? What does that play in terms of gender pay gaps or in terms of policy solutions, that might come forward? Is education public or private? Are the opportunities that are available, in those spaces? I think that there's elements to that. There's elements to the legal frameworks. These are really important. They lie, the basic framework for all of the labor market, and the health and care sector being no exception to that. And then I think I think an awareness of how feminized the sector is, an understanding of how feminized it is, and then a reactivity to that level of feminization. And I think, one of the things that we're really talking about is like, what are the opportunities in that as well, right? So we know we have a very feminized sector. We know we have a lot of women who are in this space. What opportunities do we have to ensure that they're getting, the best career that they can, and that health and care is really providing them with the opportunities for that? Yeah. Right. So I think the graph that you have up is around the proportion of women as doctors in OECD countries. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then there is another one which, as you were explaining it, kind of all made sense, because there was another statistic which actually said some of those were actually doing really bad in terms of the pay gap.
Yeah, well, just to speak to that, to the OECD graph that you put up, I think one of the things as well is we have the 70% or almost 70% of health workers who are women, but there's there's vast variation among countries, and that one just has the OECD countries, but we do have countries who don't have, who have less than 50% of the health workers who are women, and that's there. And we have countries, some of the ones that are on that graph of higher than 80% of health workers, being women. So there is this large difference in the feminization of the sector, across countries as well. That's important to think about.
Absolutely. And I suppose I just wanted to in the last few minutes, encourage people, if they have any questions as well, to pop them in, but also to consider what the new, so this here is the new report. I think I'm still sharing. Sorry for whizzing up and down, people. Here we are. So this is the one in 2021, where you are looking at some of the key findings, but also from there, but you're looking at solutions. Sorry for the background noise. But also you're looking at some solutions. So can you talk, if there's anything you haven't mentioned already, some of the things that are coming from this year's report, reflecting back on some of the actions that countries need to take. And also, I don't know whether you're able to reveal any more detail about what's coming next.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the Delivered by Women, Led by Women report that we developed and launched in 2019 is really about identifying the bottlenecks. It's about looking at the literature, seeing what the scope is out there, and identifying some of the key problems so that we can have priorities, right? So that we can think of these, if we can address some of these issues, we're going to be moving in the right direction. And that was really that. And then the next question is, okay, well, then what do we do about these sort of 4 areas that we led as a priority? And this is the first paper to really address what are some of the feasible options. If you're a policymaker and saying, okay, I want to address the gender leadership gap, well, what are some of the feasible policy options? What have we seen out there, and what would we need to be doing? And I think the next one that should be coming is a similar outline to this, looking at the other kind of occupational segregation, which is the horizontal one, and outlining some of the feasible, policy options for that. So what we're trying to do is create a roadmap to identify not only the problems, but come up with, policy solutions, so that when, decision makers decide to take action, that there's a map there for what they could potentially do.
It's really promising and really exciting, actually. So we've got another question, and that is gender equality better in the social care third sector, not-for-profit sector, versus independent sector or statutory services? I'm not sure whether this is something that the reports have looked into, but are you able to talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I would know the precise answer to that, but what we have seen is that there tends to be more challenges in some of the areas where there's less oversight or regulation on the labor market. So that's where we tend to see more challenges. I mean, with equality in general, and gender inequalities. And so this happens where there's a lot of part-time roles, where health and care workers are holding 2 or 3 different jobs, at a part-time level. And then not having, like we said, access to the collective bargaining, access to some of the, the social protections that come with full-time roles. So I'm not sure that it's a public versus private easy line. It's certainly something we will be investigating more and understanding better. I think it is really about the full-time versus part-time, the amount of job security that's attached to those roles, and then where are the legal frameworks? Are they only governing the public sector? Are they governing both the public and the private sector? And I think some of these are laws and regulations that cover public and private care, and some of them are specific to particular sectors. And those probably we probably see stronger in the private sector or public sector, over the private sector. But it's not something I could say firmly, only intuitively.
No, that's still really helpful. And I don't know, will you do like a comparative analysis between different countries?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that, as an economist, I'm very interested in is around the gender pay gap issues. And for that, certainly we'll be looking at, differences in gender pay gap across countries, which, we'll have a lot of rich information involved in it.
Well, that is really interesting. And I really appreciate it. It's been a kind of very short half an hour blitzing through all of the issues that you've raised and the research that you're doing. I think it's very worthwhile work, and really appreciate all your efforts in this. Of course, we will have lots of links of where people can read the reports. I'm probably following you on Twitter or the World Health Organization on Twitter. I don't know if that would also help.
Yeah, and the other thing is that individuals who want to get involved, we have the Global Health Workforce Network Gender Equity Hub, and you're welcome to join. It's an open network, and so if you want to join, there's a Twitter handle as well for Gwen that we can link to, and then we can share maybe the link for joining that network as well.
That would be really, really helpful. I just feel like now is a really critical time because we haven't touched on it. But another issue, of course, is how all of this is going to be impacted by COVID, and what are the challenges on everything that you've looked at already on COVID. But what I will say is that you do touch on it in the reports, so that's really helpful for people to have a reference to. But obviously, there's some extra challenges there as well. So thank you so much, Michelle. That's been really informative. And like I said, really good pieces of work you're doing there. So we'll let you go. Thank you so much from Geneva.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. I found that really interesting. It is worthwhile going through the reports. One of them is, the first one is quite long. And the second one, the most recent one, is a lovely summary of the first one, delivered by women, led by men, and also some of the recommendations that people can do. Feel free to share this as a introduction to people, maybe teammates, maybe family, friends who you feel might find the report and some of what was mentioned today quite useful. Sorry for the background noise. But yes, I think it is really important that we share these ideas and we share these concepts. And actually, I was able to plug these reports in something, an event that I attended where someone was trying to say that there isn't much evidence of whether there are disparities in health and social care. And I was able to say, actually, the World Health Organization has done a literature review on this, and they've looked at over 170 reports, and this is what they found. So it's actually really good to highlight the issues that people are facing. And obviously it's more about global health. It's not centered on the UK or any particular country, but I think the comparative analysis is really useful. We can appreciate some of the great policies that we have in this country, and also some of the things that we need to do to move things forward. And of course, it is an extremely gendered profession, and there's a lot of unpaid work, lack of unionization, and other issues as well. So do check out all the information. Just a little bit of a recap on some of the things that we have been doing. A few weeks ago now, we did a live stream on CQC's Out of Sight report on restraint, segregation and seclusion. So that was a report that they did on those issues in assessment and treatment units, and it was a conference, so it was 6 hours, and all those lovely guests you can see there were represented, and it really was a fantastic day. It's all on our YouTube channel. If you follow us on YouTube, you can find the recording, you can watch it back. There's timestamps, so if you're particularly interested in the law around it, or you're particularly interested in lived experiences, then that's all represented in the description area of that YouTube video. Of course, if you prefer Facebook, you can watch it on there as well, and it's also on our Twitter page. Very much recommend looking at that and sharing with your colleagues or friends and family who might find some of the speakers really interesting. Keep those issues alive. And going back again, we're almost at the end of the year, but this year has been the World Health Organization's Year of the Health and Social Care Worker. And we have a live stream from Jim Campbell, who's leading that initiative at the WHO. So definitely, of course, you can find that on our YouTube again, and you can look at that and read through some of the issues and some of the things that they're recommending that people do to support people working in the sectors again. So I think that's everything from us. Thanks everyone for joining. Please do share, retweet, like. That's really important because that helps the algorithms, as I always say, and it just gets more people watching and engaging with our work. So thank you very much from me, Sophie Chester-Glynn at Coproduce Care, and look forward to seeing you again on another live stream. Bye now.